Okay, so I'll just give all
Good.
and you. Steve.
A lot of times when I teach, I like to talk about why we're doing what we're doing. It's good to be able to know about gardening, but the important thing is kind of why we want to do this type of ministry. I came to Christ in 1974, and it made a huge difference in my life. I actually felt Christ come into the cavity of my chest, and I could sense his glory. And after that, I felt that God wanted his glory to go as far as it could, that the glory of the Lord would cover the earth as the water covers the sea. And so in this whole process, it's important for us to see that this is not just about growing vegetables. It's really about honoring God in what he has given us, and really seeing that he has given us everything that we need for life and godliness. And we're going to be using a lot of teaching today, and a lot of it is, I find it very interesting, but we've been studying this for about 14 years. We're going to try to make it simple, and we do have a handout at the end, and we do like questions, and so if any questions you have, we'd be happy to give those. And so, let's see how this is going to work here. Are we okay? Yeah. I came to Christ in 1974 and started working with an organization called Youth of the Mission. And we led a bunch of people to Christ. That turned into a church that we started in Cambridge. And then from that, I Lynn and I helped plant the airport church. And then the airport, it was called the Airport Christian Fellowship. It's called Catch the Fire now. They sent us out to plant a church in Thornhill. And we were the pastors there to about 2007. In 2004, I was listening to a guy by the name of Wes Campbell, and he was teaching about Africa. I had done a lot of missions, but it was mostly in Central America, South America, and I'd never even considered about Africa. And he was teaching about the fact at that time that there were 40 million unsupported children or orphans in the continent of Africa. Now, I had been leading churches and starting churches for a long time. I was wanting to kind of step down from being the main person and be more like a speaker and go around and speak itinerantly. But when I heard that there were 40 million orphans in Africa, I said, it's going to be hard just to kind of slow down when I know that there's that number of unsupported children in that continent. Not only that, but 17,000 children die every day from hunger, malnutrition, and bad water. And that to me has always been something that bothered me, that we live in the 21st century, we can put a person on the moon, but we can't stop children from dying. And so to me there's some serious problems with that in terms of what happened. So in 2004 we took our first trip to Malawi, Africa. It's in southern part of Africa. It's one of the poorer countries in the world. And we saw unsupported children everywhere. And we started to ask lots of questions. I didn't approach this by someone inviting me to an orphanage. I came to this to try to look at this problem from the fact that there were 40 million orphans. So I wanted to see, how do you fix 40 million orphans, not how do you fix an orphanage? You see what I mean? And so we saw lots of unsupported children, and we thought, what can we do to do that, to help with that? At the same time, my wife had been pastoring with me. She had been a nurse for 20 years, but she'd been pastoring with me for about 14 years. And she wanted to do something different as well. And she had heard about a product that really helped herself and her family. And so she started a company. And I said, well, I will help you with the company if we can direct the profits from that to do some work in Africa. And so that was the beginnings of the funding for Organics for Orphans. And I've been blessed that the company, God has blessed the company, and God has blessed what we're doing. In 2005, we went to East Africa to try to look at what we could do there. And everywhere we went, we visited all kinds of organizations. And the problem is that I couldn't find a garden in any of the organizations. It was difficult. It was very frustrating for me because they wanted me to provide money for them. But they have a better climate for growing food than we do in Canada. And the difficulty is that that's a slum in Africa where there's just so many, there's 1 million people in the slum. It's just a really bad place. The difficulty is that we don't understand what's happened with agriculture for for small farmers around the world. In the last 70 years, big companies introduced chemical fertilizers. They were cheap. Instead of growing 20 different crops, they started encouraging people to grow 1 or 2 different crops, primarily corn in Africa. And so fertilizer, a big bag of fertilizer, was $10 a bag, and a small farmer could actually grow enough corn for his family and sell some corn, so he actually had a little bit of cash. That was when fertilizer was $10 a bag. Now it's $70 a bag, and so the average farmer, unless they're doing 100 acres, they can't make any money on a farm. And so probably 80% of the farms in Africa are small 1 to 2 acre farms, and so most of the food supply in Africa for the average person has collapsed because agriculture just doesn't work for the small farmer. And so this is my dad here. He's 90 in a couple weeks, and my mom's 91, and he has eaten out of a garden for 90 years. He was born during the Depression, 1927. If they didn't grow food, they didn't eat. There was nothing else there. And so he's been eating out of a garden for 90 years, and the difficulty he has is that all of his friends have died. They've all eaten packaged and processed and empty food, and that's the saddest part, is my dad is still quite healthy, but all of his friends have died because they lived in the city, they went to the store, bought food that we consider and understand that is really empty. And so in 2007, I realized that if you could help African communities to grow their own food, they would look after the surplus children. So if you can imagine, I'm not sure how many children each of you have, but we have 4 children, we have 10 grandchildren. So let's say I've got my 4 children, and I don't have enough food to feed them, and 10 of their friends are standing outside the door. Then I'm going to want to get rid of those kids because it's just a constant reminder that we don't have enough food. But if we could empower local communities to grow the food that they grew probably 50 to 70 years ago, then the Africans would look after the surplus children, and all the children would be looked after. You know, Barack Obama, he was the past president of the United States. His grandfather has a farm probably about 30 miles away from where our training center is in Africa. And if you read Barack Obama's autobiography, it talks about his grandfather's farm, and when his father grew up there, they had like 20 different things that they grew rather than just corn. If you go to Africa today and you fly over with an airplane, you'll just see corn and corn and corn and corn and corn and more corn. And so it's difficult. So in 2007, I found an organic agricultural college in Africa that teaches them how to make their own fertilizer, make their own pesticides, save their own seeds, and it uses much less water. And so this is the gentleman who's kind of the grandfather of organic farming. His name's John Jevons, and he wrote a book called How to Grow More Vegetables. And it's a great textbook on how to do it. And so he's been doing this for about 50 years. So all the science has been tested, and it's all there. And so it's a little bit hard to see. Something happened with the light. But anyway, it says that with organic garden per square foot, you can grow 2 to 6 times as much food per square foot. You don't need fertilizers, you don't need pesticides, and you don't need to buy expensive seeds in most cases because you can buy your own seeds. And so this was the gentleman who taught me.
You can save your own seeds, Darren.
Save your own seeds,
not buy
yeah.
your own seeds.
This is the gentleman who taught me in the school, and he had a passion for unsupported children as well. And so I asked if he would work with us, and that was the beginning of Organics for Orphans. And so we started doing 5-day workshops in the poorest communities. Some of the villages I would go there, and they hadn't seen a white person before, and the little children would cry because who is this white person? And the joke in Africa is that white people are black people turned inside out. So that's what they think. And so this was an example of a little workshop. So we would have 12 families or 15 families, and they'd be looking after 50 children, and they had good land and good growing conditions. But they didn't know how to do it organically. And so basically they tried to grow corn until the farm would not produce anything, and then they would head to the slum, and their lives would be even worse. I jokingly tell people in Africa, I can't take my dad to Africa because he would be so jealous because they can grow amazing food all year round. And in Canada, we have to fight to, once it gets cold, to grow food like 6 months a year. And so you can see here we started doing projects with the poorest communities. And for every project we did, there were 3 more communities that wanted us to do a project. And so we needed to hire some more people. This was our director's front yard. So he's standing on his porch of his house, and you can see all the food that he could produce in a very small piece of land. We started to hire some more trainers and started doing many, many different projects. And so these are different mamas, and we're growing different types of food. Just trying to get this thing there. And simple tools, no tractors, no expensive machinery, just simple tools that anybody could use. And so you could see that we could get amazing results and if we did it right. And so these are just different villages that we were working in. And this is big. We realized that we needed to train more people, so we created this training center. And now we have a 1-month seminar where people from other organizations can come, and we teach them from the time they wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to like 10 o'clock at night. We teach them on all the things they knew. And so this is an example of a class. We usually have people from 7 different countries will come to our 1-month seminar, and it's very powerful for them to learn. And so one of the interesting things is that we have our training center. And Linda was going, and she has a very interesting testimony, my wife does, and she's written a book on her testimony. But anyway, she was in a prison, and she was talking to the ladies about forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. And Linda was looking around, and she saw, well, there was 200 women, and there was all kinds of land, but there was nothing for them to eat, and they were eating the worst diet. And so Linda said to the lady who ran the prison, she says, well, what we really do is we teach them how to grow organic food. Can we do that? And that was about a year ago. And now in a women's prison with 200 women, we have 800 garden beds. And so it's providing watermelons, all kinds of things that they've never even eaten before. And so this is in the men's prisons. Now it's in about 5 different men's prisons. And we actually created a 1-month seminar for the people in the prisons as well. It's a simpler version than our training center, but it's very life-changing. And so people can go there, and they might be there for a year, and they can come out and become master gardeners. They understand about nutrition, and they could be a herbalist as well. And so these are the different things that we put on the walls of their dormitory. And again, there's nothing in there. It's where they stay, it's just one big open room. They might have a mat to sleep in, but the food they ate before was really poor. And the difficulty for us to understand, and for me to understand, especially as a Canadian, is that food security or growing enough food was only one of the problems. If you live in Africa, they have tropical diseases. They have cholera and typhus and TB and pneumonia and dysentery and malaria. Not even talking about things like Ebola or HIV. So usually when we go into a village, and I like to go to the villages and see the projects, when we come there, we drive up, the mamas are dancing, and it's really quite fun to see them dance, and they get so excited when we come to visit. We went to this one particular village and to see, and nobody's there. And we thought, what's going on? These mamas usually love to see us. And in that particular village, there were 16 funerals in one day. And so for us in Canada, we don't like our cold weather. Anybody like the cold weather in Canada? Yeah, I don't think I'll get many takers on that here. And but the difficulty is it beats back the diseases. It kills off the bacteria. But in a tropical country, they just get stronger and stronger. And so we knew that we not only just had to grow food, we had to grow foods that would fight disease. And so that was, whoops, whoa, what's going on here? I think something stuck. I'll go back a bit. Yeah, there we are. This is our training center. Not only do you teach them how to grow different foods, we also had to teach them how to cook the foods, because they were just used to eating corn, growing corn, and eating corn. That's all they did. And so we began to teach them how to grow foods. And this is a graduation. And let's see if we can do that again. And that's the funeral. One of the books when we started to look at trying to find information about fighting diseases or keeping people healthy is this is a book by the name, it's called Healthy at 100 by John Robbins. Now, there's kind of a funny story with this book. John Robbins was the man who was supposed to inherit the Baskin-Robbins empire. Anybody know what Baskin-Robbins is? It's, I don't know, 57 versions of ice cream. And at an early age, he noticed that his family, some of the older members, were dying from heart attacks and different diseases.
In their 50s.
And their 50s.
They weren't that old.
And and so he realized that the company that his father had started probably wasn't going to help people if they ate gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons of it over their lifetime. And so what he did is he wrote several different books, but this is a book in which he identified the oldest living people groups in the world. And in this book he talks about 7 different people groups. And in that it was really important for us to understand, why do these people have a very large percentage of their population live to be 100? It's not just a group of 50 people here, a group of 50 people here. These were large population groups. And so that is one of the things that we wanted to look at, because the average life expectancy you'll see in Kenya is only 65. Now our average life expectancy is close to 80. If the average life expectancy is, let's say, 63, there's a lot of people dying very young. Do you understand? And so what happens is that we need to look at, what does God want for us as when he created us as a father? What does he want? And so, you know, if I was 20 years old, I would want to start a different business. I would walk up to the richest people in the world, people who had lots of money, and I would say to them, if I can show you how to add 10 healthy years to your life, what would it be worth to you? I'll do it, but I need $100,000. And so what is health worth? What is health worth to us? That's the thing that is really important for us to look at. And so, do you think, this is a question, do you think God wants us to live to be 100? Healthy at 100? Do you think God wants us to live to be that age? The difficulty is that when I go to a village and I see 16 funerals in Africa, I see big holes in their society. Key people have been lost, and damage has been done to the whole village. And so a lot of times we look at a funeral or we look at somebody dying, we say, well, that's sad. But we really don't understand how big of a part that they play in our families and our societies. And so when you look at that, it's important for us to look at, historically, what did God think about people getting older? When you look at Abraham, this is really cool. Genesis 25, verse 7. Abraham lived 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age. Now this is the important thing. It says, an old man and satisfied with life. How many people when they're 80 or 90? My uncle died last night. He was 94. And I don't know that many people when they're in their old age, they say, I was satisfied. I really did what I wanted to do with my life. Joseph, he lived to the age of 110 in the Bible. Aaron lived to be the age of 123. And Moses, when he lived to be 120 years old. Joshua lived to be 110 years old. And Jedediah, he lived to be 130 years old. All of these people, God had a purpose for them. Am I right? He had a purpose for them. He kept them around for a reason. Now, in Proverbs 3, verse 16, it says, long life, it's talking about wisdom. In Proverbs, it talks about wisdom. It says, long life is in her right hand, and her left hand are riches and honor. So we need to understand why it's important, why we're going to grow this garden. I believe that God wants us to live to be a very ripe old age. It says, now this is a promise. This is a promise that God has for you. This is a promise God has for you. You should be able to say yes to this promise. It says, whoops, this one, something's wrong with my clicker here. There. It says, with long life I will satisfy him and let him see my salvation. So does God want us to live a long life? Now what happens when disease happens and people die prematurely? I believe it's the enemy stealing from us. And in Ruth it says, may he also be the restorer of life and the sustainer of your old age. Let's see if we can get this thing moving here. Now, we understand that in the garden, when Adam sinned, there was a curse that was placed upon the human race. You know, you're only going to live to be this length of time. But I believe that the curse was broken when the relationship with God was restored. And you know, in Genesis 3 verse 7, it also says, cursed is the ground because of you. And people have problems farming because I believe they don't know the farmer, the original farmer. And so when you look at this, this is an example of an older gentleman. He's one of the most famous African Americans, and his name's George Washington Carver, and he was a Christian, and he listened to God. He listened to the gardener. He tried to understand what God had placed in creation. And he created hundreds of uses for sweet potato. He actually created peanut butter. Anybody like peanut butter? Yes. Okay. He actually created peanut butter. He believed that you could reverse the curse that was on the soil. And so what do you believe? Do you believe that you're supposed to live to be 100? Yeah, in our heads we say that, but in our hearts we say, is something going to happen to me? Am I going to get sicker? Is something going to happen? And I don't believe that's supposed to happen. And so these are examples in National Geographic. National Geographic, anybody know that magazine? Yeah. They have been studying the longest lived people groups throughout history. And this is the Hunzas. They live in northern Pakistan. And this is the food that they eat, okay? They eat grain chapatis, sprouted legumes, fresh raw cabbage, fresh fruit, fresh raw cabbage, unpasteurized fresh milk, a little bit of meat, once a week. Now, by the time this is done, I have to keep asking you, God commands you to love me, okay? God commands me to love me. So if I step on some of the things that you like, and you still have to love me. That's just, the Bible says, you know? And so they had ample water, fresh air, sunlight, and exercise. They have a huge percentage of the population live to be 100. Now, when they took and compared, they put took two rats. They took a bunch of rats, and they fed them the Hunza diet, and then they fed another bunch of rats the English diet, and English diet of white bread, tin food, sugar tea. They developed diseases in every organ and behave viciously toward each other. Which diet do you think God wants us to eat? And so, you know, so here's a couple of these guys from this community. He's 87, his son is 72.
Gee.
They're kind of cute guys, aren't they, you know? And they were not afraid of hard work. And in North America, we don't think that's a good idea. Now what they do is they live in very mountainous areas. And what they do is they capture the water and they make little growing areas. And so the minerals are in their water, and it's very good for the soil. And so you can see there, they grow a lot of apricots. And in the wintertime when it's cold, they're eating a lot of dried fruit. This is the Vilcabongas. They're actually in South America. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. And if I can get my clicker to work. And so the four things in the book, the Healthy at 100, they had a food connection. They had a body connection. They were very active. They were very close as a community. They had grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids, and all of them lived very close. And there was also a spiritual component to who they were. And we can go. So my question to you, does God want you to live to be 100? I believe he does, and I believe there's a blueprint that we can look at that. Only 2.7% of Kenyans are over 65 years of age. So you can imagine how much pain is in that country. When we first started going there, I would meet somebody, and I'd come back 3 months later, and they'd be dead. And I said, what did they die from? We don't know, they just died. And so it's important for us to see that there is some serious things that cause people to die prematurely. And so, again, here's my dad, 90. grown his food all his life, has had no medical issues. What's interesting is my mom's French and my dad's English. My mom lived on macaroni dinners, white bread, and everything that came out of a package. She met my dad when she was 19, and he grew up on a farm. And even though my mom works much, much harder at staying healthy, my dad's much healthier than he is. Because the foundation of his life was very close to the soil. And so I think I'm going to have my wife Linda jump in now. And yeah, we won't go into that.